The Bonnies get a huge win this weekend at Duquesne. Can they follow up that success with a win at George Mason? And who should the Bonnies watch out for? In 15 minutes, where has this women's team been the past couple weeks? Asian A continues her hot streak, and Ayana Lopes is stepping up in big ways. All the action from a winning week in Bonnies basketball now on BBN. Hello everyone and welcome to BBN. I'm joined today by the Olean Times-Herald's JP Butler and SBU-TV sports reporter Leah Lockwood. Just announced last night, the A-10 has announced a schedule update for the Bonnies. St. Bonaventure was originally scheduled to take on St. Louis back on January 8th, but will now have an intriguing home-and-home matchup with the Billikens in mid-February. The Bonnies will travel to St. Louis on Friday, February 11th to take on the Billikens on ESPN2. Then the following Monday, we'll play St. Louis at home on CBS Sports Network. That's definitely going to be a huge game for the Bonnies, both of those games. So as we start off this show, we're asking the question, what are the Bonnies? Seriously, do you know? The Bonnies, they've reached the highs of the highs this season and the lowest of the lows. Some may say they've been a struggling team with uncharacteristic issues, and others say a team on the verge of the bubble in the NCAA tournament, regaining its momentum from last season. Halfway through the season, Mark Schmidt's group finds themselves playing from behind a little bit too often. The examples can be found in their matchups against Northern Iowa, Virginia Tech, and most recently that Dayton game. The depth of this year's starters team is deep and the experience is not a problem. But what must this Bonnies team do to get back on track and kind of get back to that level that they were at last season? They had an opportunity to do that in their game against Duquesne. Things started off with the Shun show. Shun had a huge block and an offensive rebound and a basket to start things off. And then Shun, throughout the entire course of the game, was just in the right place at the right time with this offensive rebound and slam. And with 5 seconds to go in the half, Shun continued his amazing first half with this electrifying block. Early in the second half, Shun kept off exactly where he left off once again with this electric putback dunk, and it seemed like throughout this entire course of this game, whenever the Bonnies needed an offensive rebound and a basket, Shun was there to get it. Later, important Quadri Adams minutes in this one. Almost turns it over, but finds the hot player in Shun for the easy slam once again. Later, Shun with another putback, and then Kyle, who's been struggling all game in this one, hits his only three-pointer of the game, but in a key position, helping the Bonnies seal this victory. They end up winning this one 64-56. St. Bonaventure going to George Mason next, have to play their third game in 5 days when the Bonnies play them Wednesday night, following their win last night against St. Joe's and their victory over Dayton last week, who the Bonnies just recently lost to. The Bonnies will take on George Mason Wednesday, so JP, when that ball gets tipped off, who on the Bonnies roster needs to have that big game to help the Bonnies get past them? Because it's no easy game in the A-10 this year. Yeah, so I think for him personally and for the team to have success in this one, that guy's going to be Dominic Welch. He's a guy that's gone a little under the radar, just given his struggles of late. He's just 1 for his last 16 from three-point range. He hasn't really shot the ball well since coming off the COVID break, but this might be sort of the remedy for him. This is a team he's had success against last year in the Riley Center. He went 9 of 11 from the floor, 4 of 6 from threes, 22 points in that one. And his career high for threes has come against George Mason, the A-10 tournament game his freshman year. He hit 6. So this would maybe be the time for him to have another good game against the Patriots.
For me, from George Mason, it's going to be Josh Oduro. He definitely has a really persistent paint presence. He's a really dominant big man, but he will shoot the three ball, and he knows how to block a shot, efficiently rebound. But I think the Bonnies have to use their experience and their size to their advantage in that.
And then last Friday, of course, the Bonnies women's team played St. Joseph's, and the Bonnies men's team on Saturday going to end up facing St. Joseph's as well. And in that game, both of them, St. Joseph's, they have one of the most famous mascots in the entire country, and that's the Hawk. And JP, you have a story about the Hawk when it came into the Riley Center back when you covered the team. What's that story? That was a pretty good story.
So we're going to do story time here on BBN here, okay? So, I mean, this was, back in the day, early 2000s. We all know that the Hawk, his thing pre-game is to run the figure eights around the floor as St. Joe's is coming out. He does that. Somebody from the student section, now it's getting a little hazy at this point, but somebody from the student section came out and ran into him or bumped him or confronted him in some way, and I think actually knocked this person over. It turns out this student who was the mascot, their father was present, saw this go down, left his seat, went down and confronted the kid. They got into it, security had to get involved. It was a whole thing right before tip-off in that game. So certainly the Hawk is a mascot that Bonner fans have had a love-hate relationship with over the years.
That Hawk will come into town on Saturday. They were just here last Friday, and obviously the flapometer that ESPN had a couple years ago says that it has about 6,300 flaps per game, which is just outstanding. I don't know, do you think you could use 6,300 flaps in a game?
Absolutely not. You definitely get a workout.
You definitely do. They are on full scholarship at the end of the day, so I guess it's kind of worth it, right?
And they earned it, if that's what they're doing.
So the Bonnies get that big win against Duquesne, and what we have learned to come to know that this A10 season is no gimme wins. Davidson, who is now ranked in the AP Top 25, they barely escaped Fordham. So JP, what can you say on this, just this unpredictability in the A10?
Yeah, and the coaches talk about it all the time. Coach Schmidt likes to talk about it all the time, and sometimes you want to dismiss it when he says, all the cliche stuff about no game is easy, every game is going to come down to the last few possessions, but that really is kind of what it's shaping up to be. The top half of the league has been established for a couple of years now, but everybody behind that is starting to get better and is more of a threat than maybe they would be in the past, including this George Mason team that Bonnie's going to see on Wednesday. They weren't great last year. They've gotten a lot better in year one under Kim English, and we saw it over the weekend. The fact that Davidson, who's not nationally ranked, barely survives a Fordham team that was always in the basement of the league. So it does go to show, for as much as you want to think, that some of these games are gimmies or need to be guarantees for that resume. Nothing is going to be guaranteed on a nightly basis.
Yeah, and you take a look at the current A10 standings on your screen. Davidson, they've been locked in at that number one. Obviously, they just entered the AP Top 25. St. Bonaventure right behind them, and then VCU, who the Bonnies just took care of. Then Dayton's right behind them. So St. Bonaventure is still holding that edge on Dayton just because they have those three, and Dayton has 2 losses in the A10. Then George Mason, they kind of been a surprise so far. Bonnies are going to take on them on Wednesday. They're coming in at that next slot. So Bonnies versus George Mason. Do you think George Mason has that true shot to upset the Bonnies in this one?
I think they're a whole different new look team from last year. They're another one. I feel like there are a handful of teams in the A10 that just have that whole new team of transfers, maybe 1 or 2 returning guys, some young, rising freshmen. I do think that's going to be a tough game. I think the advantage for Bonn is the fact that George Mason's having to play 2 games in 3 days. They're only going to have the 1 day to prepare for Bonn, whereas Bonn has been able to prepare for this game really since they got back from Duquesne on Friday night. I think that's where the advantage is going to be.
And then in the A10 schedule, later tonight, Richmond and Rhode Island will take on each other, and then Fordham at Dayton. So we'll see how good of a team Fordham is after just barely losing to Davidson earlier last week. We'll see if they can take on Dayton, put up a game in that one. And then Wednesday, as the Bonnies take on George Mason, UMass will be at LaSalle, Duquesne at St. Joseph's, George Washington at St. Louis. Then VCU will be the team to try to take down the undefeated in the A10 Davidson Wildcats when they take on them at 8:30 on CBS Sports Network. In 4 minutes, we look around the A10 and analyze what the Bonnies must do to keep finding victories. This is BBN.
I don't remember how it started.
Go to that.
Our back and forth. It always came back. Dad! You probably don't remember what you told me,
That was perfect.
but I heard every word.
When I was in foster care, I never knew when I would have to move, so I always had my suitcase ready to go. Then one day, I was adopted. My new parents opened their hearts and home to me. My parents cook my favorite breakfast for me every morning. My parents take me on trips I never thought I would go on. They gave me a home and an even better reason to use that suitcase. My parents aren't perfect, but they're perfect for me.
Great show, such good coverage. Thank you to all of our viewers for helping us grow this show. We appreciate you sticking with us every week. We are doing this show for you, and we hope you continue to enjoy our coverage this season of Bonnies basketball. And a special thank you to Spectrum as well, who have been airing our broadcasts on Spectrum. This will be the last one that they do that for, so we appreciate their support as well. And now getting into a new segment, one word. JP, I'm going to start with you. One word about Bonnies basketball right now.
So this week, the word's critical. So my thing was, coming off that Dayton loss, they had 3 road games that really I thought they needed to win to keep themselves in that at-large conversation and to bring that momentum to set the big stage for the Davidson home game against a nationally ranked opponent right now. That's going to be the first game with a full student section back, so that game's going to be huge. And to make that as big as it can possibly be, getting all 3 of these wins. They've already knocked one of those out. They have the 2 this week against Mason and Gross to do that. And the same word actually applies to the women as well. They started out 0-5 in conference play. It was critical for them to be able to get the monkey off their back, so to speak, and they were able to do that against George Mason on Sunday, right behind another great game from Asian A. Johnson.
You know, my word is reassurance. I think that there's a lot of excitement surrounding this week's men's game. First game back at home since the students have been back, like you touched on. It's also going to be alumni weekend. The energy is going to be insane, I hope. And then for the women, like you also touched on, they needed that win, so that was kind of reassuring. It looks like they're finally, the pieces are clicking together, knowing how to put that full 40 minutes of play together.
Yeah, I think all of our things kind of go around kind of the same type of things. My word, or compound word, hyphenated, whatever you want to say, bounce back. The men's team, exactly. The men's team, they needed that bounce back win after losing to Dayton. They got almost, you know, I don't want to say embarrassed, but they went into that game. They didn't put their best foot forward, and they got schooled almost. So they got that bounce back win though against Duquesne on national TV. That was huge, and of course the Bonnie's women's team 0-5, both mentioned to start the conference. They needed a bounce back victory in the worst way. They were able to get it against George Mason at George Mason, and as you mentioned, Asian A. Johnson. 4 consecutive 20-point games. It was just crazy to me. She had 21 points as her career high going into this little stretch, and now she's surpassed that twice in a row, which is just amazing from her. And Yaya Lopes is also having an outstanding run in her own right as well. And then taking a quick look around the A-10, we kind of mentioned the just craziness that the A-10 has been so far this season, kind of teams knocking each other out almost. George Mason, they beat Dayton, we mentioned that. And then George Washington, also lower end of the conference, beating Rhode Island, who's kind of thought of, you know, one of the top tier teams in the A-10 conference. So the A-10 is unpredictable.
Yeah, and again, you know, going back to what we said, Coach Schmidt says it all the time, and sometimes you're like, oh, you know, I wish he'd say, you know, something different, but it really does apply where you just have to be able to bring your A game every day to have success in this league. It is going to be interesting this year because I think it's a little more maybe wide open. I still think you have your teams at the top with Davidson, Bonna, VCU, St. Louis, but those 4 teams are going to be challenged more than they probably have in recent years. It's going to be interesting to see how a team like Bonna responds to maybe not having a string of easy games.
Do the Bonnies need to win the A-10 conference to be able to get into the tournament this year?
You know, it's an interesting question. There's such, you know, debate on social media right now with fans, some people who feel like they've underachieved or maybe have even disappointed. We've seen that word. I don't think it's anything like that. Are they, you know, a bit below maybe where we would have thought after the Charleston championship? Maybe. But I think in the grand scheme of things, they're still right where they need to be. They're still absolutely in at-large contention. They have everything in front of them still when you look at if you're able to win the St. Louis, the Richmond, the VCU games. You know, 11-4 right now with wins over Marquette, Boise State, Clemson, and VCU. It's hard to get that much better than that if you just take out how bad like the Virginia Tech loss was. I don't think there's a whole lot to complain about.
I agree 100%. I think that they are a little bit below where we kind of expect them to be, but I'm going to go on behalf of Bonna Nation here and say that they definitely still have a chance to make their case for the tournament, and just as long as they don't drop those silly games and make silly little mistakes anymore.
Right. You look at, Marquette and Boise State wins now especially. Marquette's on another level right now. Beat Villanova, beating Xavier the way they have. That win's doing a lot of the heavy lifting. You know, for Boise State is in at-large consideration right now too. You have those 2 wins under your belt. So again, I think they're in a good place.
We can take a step back a little bit. This is still one of the top teams in the A-10. The future is very bright for just the remaining of the season. We'll just leave it at that. Revisiting that Duquesne game, the Duquesne Dukes, they had a big start to that second half and made you kind of wonder, is this going to be another one of those crazy games in the A-10? A transition dunk here, keeping the lead in the midst of that Duquesne run.
Teams play well at home. There are no guarantees. That Duquesne team does have talent. Same thing, new look, brand new team, from last year that, played to their capability too, and they gave Bonner game, ultimately Bonner handled it well though.
And Leah, even though Lofton may have struggled throughout that game, he did have the finishing touch alley-oop to Schoen that was followed by another Schoen block. With about 53 seconds to go, Schoen just had a game for the ages.
Right, obviously players are going to struggle every game or so. Everyone does it, but when you come up big, when your team needs you, that's what really matters.
That's exactly what Kyle did. Still to come, we examine the women's upcoming week of play, and in 4 minutes, we make our picks for tomorrow night's game against George Mason. Nobody here has ever picked against the Bonnies. Will we see that here this week? Probably not, but this is BBN. Stay tuned.
Put the keys down, Kevin.
But I'm gonna drive home.
There are several warning signs present that you shouldn't be driving.
My text to emoji ratio has gotten a little out of hand.
A little?
Yep, I'm definitely gonna call a ride home.
I mean, when you are able to dominate the game from the defensive side like he is, there's some things that don't show up in the stat sheet. He, aside from the block shots, he'll change shots. He'll make you think about going in there and, shooting some of the shots that you would normally shoot.
Welcome back to BBN. As we take a look at the women's A-10 standings, St. Bonaventure obviously just got their first A-10 win against George Mason back on Sunday afternoon. So you take a look, Rhode Island and Dayton leading the pack at 5-0 in the conference so far, and St. Bonaventure's next opponent coming up on Wednesday, LaSalle. They're currently at 3 at 5-1 in the conference. That's going to be a huge game for St. Bonaventure to try to improve their standings in the A-10.
Yeah, and a winnable game. That's the way you have to look at these now that you're sort of proving you've taken the next step. They're one win away from having their highest win total ever in the 6 years under Jesse. They've got that first A-10 win under their belt. Asian A. Johnson appears to be playing at a whole other level right now, a first-team all-conference type player. Now you've got some real momentum. To me, the goal is finishing outside that bottom four. They've been in that bottom four the last couple of years. Get past that part, and then maybe try to make a push for the top half even of the conference.
Right, and I think using that momentum from the George Mason game definitely can help them moving forward. It looks like they are finally, learning how to put the full 40 minutes together, working as a team, just knowing how to finish games.
Yep.
And then finishing out the remaining A-10 women's schedule, Fordham, UMass, VCU, Richmond, St. Bonaventure. These are going to be all games to look out for the Bonnies later in the season. Obviously, the 0-5 start, not ideal, but they were in all of those games aside from the Dayton one in their first one. So it's going to be very interesting how they can maybe put a run together potentially. And on the men's side, as we mentioned a little bit earlier before, Davidson obviously leading the conference at the moment at number 25 in the entire country. St. Bonaventure knows what that feels like being in the AP top 25. St. Bonaventure is second in the A-10 right now. Schoen, he maybe had some points in the season, obviously those back issues early in the season, so he was struggling a little bit. Finally maybe getting a step back, maybe making that push for A-10 Defensive Player of the Year again like he was last year. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see how he can progress throughout the remaining of the season. Hopefully Kyle can turn back into that 1-2 punch that we've been so accustomed to throughout their 4 years here. And now, obviously, St. Bonaventure will be facing off against George Mason tomorrow night. Let's take a look at our final predictions for those games. JP, we'll start with you.
So, part of me for a second there was thinking about maybe picking
be the first that would be monumental on the show.
I think that time probably we don't want to be too big of homers in here. So that time maybe at a St. Louis or at a VCU, both of those games are on the horizon. Because George Mason really is so much more improved this year, and I do think this Kim English is the real deal for them as a coach. This is a George Mason team that another team that Bona has owned. They've only lost to this team once since they joined the A-10 7 years ago. I have Bona 71-63.
I have Bona 71-65, and I think, like JP said, as long as we use that experience, establish a paint presence over Oduro, shut them down early, make sure no one gets on any runs, I think we got it in the bag.
You guys got the bias score on a lot of points here. I got 66. 5 less points for the Bonnies, but I think it's going to be a little bit closer, 66-62, just because I know home teams throughout all of college basketball always play their better opponents that they're facing very tough at home, and we saw it. Obviously, George Mason just beat Dayton, right, at home.
Yeah.
So home teams, especially in the A-10 and these smaller conferences, always seem to play up to their opponent. So I think it's gonna be a very close game. A game St. Bonaventure could lose. It's like an upset watch a little bit. I wonder what the spread's gonna be. St. Bonaventure's probably gonna be favored by a lot, but definitely not a team to overlook in George Mason. They've definitely showcased that they're capable. Definitely no pushovers in the A-10 this season. The Bonnies will take on George Mason tomorrow night in a key game for the Bonnies. That's all the time we have for BBN this week. My thanks to the Olean Times-Herald's J.P. Butler and SBU-TV sports reporter Leah Lockwood for joining me on the desk today. I'm Ryan Bowen saying so long, and we'll see you next week.